Thank you for joining the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston for our weekly online ministers forum. I'm the Reverend Dr. Colin Bossen, Senior Minister of the congregation. These programs are conversations with community organizers, scholars, religious leaders, artists, and others about how we can collectively address the present crises. Their purpose is to offer members of our community and all who wish to join us online science-based resources and liberation-oriented inspiration to get us through these difficult times. Today I'm joined by the Reverend Jason Lydon. We will be talking about the action of immediate witness passed at last week's General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association titled Amen to Uprising. Reverend Lydon became an abolitionist after his own incarceration in 2003. He's been doing abolitionist organizing within the Unitarian Universalists and LGBTQ HIV-positive communities since then. He currently serves as the minister of the Second Unitarian Universalist Church of Chicago and is the founder of Black and Pink. For those of you who are with us for the first time, let me say a few words about Unitarian Universalism. We are a religious tradition that celebrates the possibility of goodness within each human heart, the transformative power of love, and the clarifying force of reason. We believe that we need not think alike to love alike. We hope that you find these forums a source of connection, hope, and clarity. Jason, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Colin.
So I thought we'd just start out and jump right into the action of immediate witness, Amen to Uprising. You were part of a multiracial group of authors of the action of immediate witness. So could you start out by just telling us what General Assembly is and what an action of immediate witness is, and then tell us a bit about the process of putting it together?
An action of immediate witness is a statement that comes out from the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly calling on Unitarian Universalists to engage in specific efforts for transformation or action throughout the coming church year. The General Assembly is our annual gathering of Unitarian Universalists coming together to make decisions about our faith movement, to engage in workshops and learning together, and to run the governing structures of our faith movement. We can have a conversation another day about whether or not they should happen every year or the impact, positive and negative, that General Assembly has on our religious tradition. But the idea is that it is a space for us to live into the multiple ways that congregational polity functions. So the bringing together of our congregations and leaders to reflect and learn together, to then shape the ways in which we do work in our autonomous yet connected congregations. This action of immediate witness was among those that went forward to continue pushing us as Unitarian Universalists to engage in the work of dismantling anti-Blackness, of working to defund police departments, and really reckoning with the heritage and history of police as our kind of modern police departments as descendants of slave patrols, and getting us to imagine how we can be different, how we as Unitarian Universalists can engage in local campaigns to transform our communities and create alternatives to policing. And the AIW process, the action of immediate witness process itself, involves lots of conversation with people who want to work together to create the wording of an action of immediate witness. A recent participant in these forums, Aisha Hauser, was among those who worked on this action of immediate witness, as well as Reverend Elizabeth Nguyen and Nora Rassman, and so many other Unitarian Universalists from around the country, trying to imagine what it was that we could be doing as a faith and respond to this moment. That an action of immediate witness means that we need to do something right now. We can't wait to do all the study work that we should already be including and engaging in at all times. We need to take some immediate action right now. And so given the global uprisings that we are seeing and participating in right now, challenging police violence and the existence of police at all potentially, is really a call for us as Unitarian Universalists to begin engaging or to continue engaging or strengthening our engagement.
What inspired you to put forth Amen to Uprising?
The original kind of Amen to Uprising effort happened as a response in some Unitarian Universalist minister Facebook groups where people were saying, oh, should we be making a statement after the horrific murder of George Floyd, being this current moment of attention to police violence against black people, and what could that statement look like? There was discussion, disagreement, and then a group of folks started working on just a general religious professionals letter in solidarity with the movement for Black lives and in solidarity with the demands to defund the police. And from there, we were able to get, I think, nearly 300 religious professional UUs from around the country to sign on to that letter or statement in many ways, and really a call out to other UUs to engage with this. And then the AIW was really thought of as an opportunity to say, okay, this isn't actually just our professional leadership. All Unitarian Universalists are called into this work, and that it's an invitation for everybody, and it's also a way of supporting those who are already in this work. I think it's important for us to remember that there are Unitarian Universalists who have been shaping and engaging in Black Lives Matter movement and in anti-racist organizing for as long as these things have existed, right? And that we have particularly Black and brown and indigenous UUs, as well as anti-racist white folks who are UUs engaging in this work. And so this AIW was an affirmation of that, as well as an invitation to those who are just now beginning to get ready to join in.
Did you receive well, actually, let's talk a little bit about the content of the AIW. So what are you kind of hoping for? Because it has some pretty specific language, and certainly I hope our viewers will go online to read it. But it has some pretty specific language about what kind of systemic change you're hoping for coming out of this, or what you're trying to support. So could you talk about kind of the content, I guess in two directions. First, from kind of like a policy perspective or a systems change perspective, and then also from a theological perspective, because this is a statement by the General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations. So while it has a lot of sort of, we could call it policy or social dimensions, it has a theological grounding underneath that. And since this is a forum for a religious community, I think it's always important to bring theology to the fore when we can, to talk about how we understand sort of the ultimate in the world and how that guides our ethical actions. So what does this say, and how is it grounded?
So I want to start with the theology piece, because I agree wholeheartedly that is central to this conversation, right? As a faith community, we are rooting ourselves in theology, and we reference that in the action of immediate witness itself, connecting both to our ancient or long time standing theology that says that hell doesn't exist. We need to wrestle, as Reverend Dr. Mark Morrison Reed has pushed upon Unitarian Universalists to say, we need to reckon with what that means. If we say that hell doesn't exist, what does that mean for us as a religious community around accountability and transformation and responsibility for behavior? So there's this important conversation happening there. And we have said that punishment itself is not salvific. And so if punishment isn't salvific after life, and we recognize that as Unitarian Universalists, we are shaped also by humanism, and so often Unitarian Universalists will say that all we need to know of heaven and hell, we can know here on earth, then our responsibility as Unitarian Universalists is to dismantle the hells that exist here. That it is a theological imperative for us to engage in the world as it is, and then be part of transforming the world to the way that it ought to be within our understanding of justice and collective liberation. And if we understand that punishment isn't salvific, then relying on an institution like the police, which are based almost solely, really, in this idea of punishing people for breaking laws that were created by a settler colonial government, an anti-black government, an anti-queer government that has, since its inception, used law for the purpose of stealing people's land, of enslaving black bodies, of regulating and controlling women and queer and trans folks, then we as a faith movement need to think beyond what is legal by our government that is rooted in these systems of oppression and imagine what we can do instead and be part of the movements that are creating these alternatives. And so the theological grounding for me is really in our universalism of doing the work of abolishing hell, that we can't abolish hell just in the theoretical or in the hereafter. We have a responsibility to eradicate hell now. And I think that some of the pieces that we've been called out on as Unitarian Universalists by Black Unitarian Universalists has really been that failure within earlier Universalism in what became the United States was not engaging with Black theology and enslaved people in particular to wrestle with, okay, well, what are the ways that we deal with hell now? And so I think part of our theological imperative is to engage in that present. And that's what this Action of Immediate Witness is inviting us to. Additionally, Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt has talked about the need for Unitarian Universalism to create space that honors Black grief, and that we need to be creating spaces that are intentional for Black folks to come together and grieve, to support and nurture one another, and for white folks to begin wrestling with culpability, responsibility, but also to develop empathy in ways that sometimes white folks are not taught to have, because of the ways that anti-Blackness permeates our society. We rely on these ideas of innocence in terms of Black folks killed by the police in order to create our own kind of white sense of grievability of Black people. And so one of the other pieces here is for white UUs as well to begin thinking about what is the pain and suffering and lamentation that we must be engaging with in order to authentically be part of a movement that abolishes police and that is rooted in collective liberation. So I think those are some of the key pieces of theology. There's more theology that we can always talk about.
Sure.
But I want to mention in terms of the policy end of things, there are concrete suggestions. For instance, congregations are being invited to make sure that they turn off any alarm systems that immediately activate the police. Right, so if your property is being entered without permission, then sometimes the alarm will go off and it immediately brings the police, and that can increase danger and the possibility of death. No amount of property that any of us own is ever worth a human life, period. And so doing the work of stopping the immediate activation of the police to your congregation is one way in which we begin to say, okay, well, what do we need? What is it that we need for safety? What does make us feel safe in our communities? And who feels safe? And what does it mean to create welcoming congregations, language that was created out of our LGBT movement? How do we learn, okay, well, we are trying to be welcoming, but to who and to which LGBT folks, right? Is it just LGBT folks who look like me, middle-class, white, cisgender, gay men, who the police have often protected us more recently in the last kind of couple of decades? That's still a new thing for gay men. But I feel like that is part of the invitation that the AIW is giving to folks, is these concrete examples of ways to get away from relying on the police. Additionally, it says that we should choose not to involve police departments in the work of the church. And so what are the ways, instead of having, so for instance, at a congregation that has community policing groups that come in and talk about safety in the neighborhood, who is that benefiting? What is that creating in terms of real community safety, as opposed to, say, bring in a transformative justice group to come in and talk about what does accountability for harm really look like? Because as abolitionists, those of us who are abolitionists, we're not saying that harm is going to disappear, right? That people are going to just stop doing harmful things to each other. Rather, what we're saying is that the police perpetuate more harm. And so it's our responsibility to come up with real solutions that are keeping us actually safer.
So recognizing the harm that police very often do as central to the work and questioning whether or not there are better ways to be safer is key to the sort of notion of abolitionism. And you're encouraging congregations to sort of ask those questions in terms of our day-to-day operations, in addition to however we might choose to be engaging in advocacy within the context of the cities and communities that we live.
Absolutely.
So, what's kind of been the response that people have? I mean, I guess today is Tuesday. This passed on Saturday, so we're, pretty pretty close to it being passed to maybe have a whole lot of response. But what has been the response of this that you've gotten?
The first piece to that response, I think, starts by acknowledging that for an action of immediate witness to pass at General Assembly, it has to receive a 2/3 majority of those who are gathered, the delegates, to vote. And it achieved not only that, but actually, I believe, had a little over 80% affirmation from those who were at the virtual General Assembly. And so there already is a clear majority of people who are at least were present in that conversation who are willing to wrestle with these things, that even if they're not quite ready for all of the different pieces in terms of what it means to defund the police, to abolish ICE, immigration custom enforcement, to begin paying reparations to Black folks and Black communities, all of which is in here, they may not know yet exactly how we're going to make that all happen, but there's a willingness to try. There's a willingness to be engaged, and it says right in the action of immediate witness that we are acknowledging that we are going to make mistakes, that this is an ever-evolving process. And so I think that that's part of what, again, I hope abolitionists are offering to people, is that we're not trying to suggest that we have all the right answers today and that we can just kind of pick something up and be like, okay, this is it, this is the solution. Unfortunately, the solutions are going to take generations. Just like it took generations to get us to where we are, it too will take us generations to get us to where we need to be, which isn't to say that we can't and shouldn't have some immediate sweeping changes, right? Defunding the police is a very concrete action. There's so many, I would say, within the kind of liberal reform movement who I would suggest are trying to co-opt that language, and they're saying when they say defund the police, they don't really mean get rid of the police. And one of the responses is, no, actually we do mean get rid of the police. So this is not something that's helping us. And so the response of what we're getting is people who are curious, people who are excited and ready, people who are scared, people who are resistant. And Unitarian Universalists, I think, run the gamut, though clearly we have, at least from our General Assembly, a majority of folks who are ready to engage in some kind of transformative action and imagining what we could do that would be different. And so I think that that's really exciting. It was in 2015 that the General Assembly passed an action of immediate witness in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement at that moment. And it included language saying that we believed in abolishing prisons. That's incredible. We as Unitarian Universalists have a history of being part of creating the U.S. prison system, right? That Benjamin Rush and others in Pennsylvania were part of these ideas of creating the prison as a reform movement, right? Their idea was that we're going to stop torturing people in public. We're going to stop using corporal punishment and harming people's bodies, and instead we're going to reform that and put people in penitentiaries so that they can pay their penance and begin writing their relationship with the society through writing their relationship with God in a process of quiet or work, whether you were in the Auburn system or the Philadelphia system. And we as Unitarians and Universalists and Unitarian Universalists have struggled over the past centuries to figure out where we fit in this carceral system and how we respond. And I think it's really exciting that we are seeing Unitarian Universalists be more ready to jump on with the abolitionist movement again, really kind of picking up where it has left off.
Well, I mean, I definitely think there's been a cultural shift within Unitarian Universalism. I just think about the reaction I tend to get to my preaching, which maybe has gotten a little, I don't think has gotten any more radical over the last 20 years, but there was, like, I used to preach sermons, in 2005, so 15 years ago? 2004, I think, was the first time I gave a sermon saying that I thought there needed to be reparations for slavery. And, like, up until 2012, so that's for 7 years, whenever I would preach a sermon on that subject, I would not get invited back to that church.
Interesting.
And often there would be, like, somebody who would walk out in the middle of the service, right?
Sure.
And, like, since 2012, I don't know what is magical about 2012, but since 2012, that has consistently not been my experience. And I think that there has been some kind of cultural shift within Unitarian Universalism over the last 2 decades, and I think that there's lots of reason for that. I mean, I think work that folks like you and Aisha and others have done around really trying to push Unitarian Universalism to live into an anti-racist commitment has, or commitments, has sort of moved out, diffused more. But it's definitely noticeable, and it's very, I mean, I feel like it's an exciting moment to be Unitarian Universalist, right? Because we have made commitments to say, like, this, our General Assembly has said it believes in abolishing prisons, and, like, this action of immediate witness, I mean, enables congregations in a different way than before to really push in their municipalities for police abolition or defunding, because now we have a statement from the General Assembly. So it's not just like, what do I, Colin Bossen, believe about, X, Y, and Z? It's like, this is a position that we've taken together as Unitarian Universalists. And, I think, and these within our faith tradition, these actions of immediate witness or their equivalents do actually have pretty long legs sometimes. I mean, they do. In 1970, the General Assembly passed its first resolution, and the language is just super outdated and awful, so I'm not going to even say what the title is, but in support of the LGBTQ community, that included within it the idea that sexual education around LGBTQ sexual orientations was an important part of what kids should learn from our faith community. That was 50 years ago, and that had a profound effect on how Unitarian Universalism developed into a more welcoming faith over the next 50 years.
That too was met with resistance, right? I would say probably, again, it had a majority of support, but then we had those really horrifically homophobic ministers who were, equating same-sex sexual attraction with sexual attraction and abuse of children. There were those, who were very focused on, quote, unquote, homosexuality as a mental illness, given that, the DSM continued, the diagnostic, whatever it stands for, manual, was still saying that homosexuality was a disease, right? And so it makes sense that in a religion that is so focused on science and rationality, that we at times get stuck in the homophobic, racist sciences, right? It's how we see so many Unitarians and Universalists were eugenicists, right? That they use kind of false and bad science that end up causing lots of harm. And that our movement is full of people who resist that and help us think differently and behave differently and come up with these actions of immediate witness and statements that help move us in a better, healthier direction as a faith.
Yeah, I mean, the histories are very complicated, and lots, we could spend a long time talking about the complexities of the histories, but I think the theology is often quite clear. It's really, do we have the courage to live into our own theology?
Mm-hmm.
Because, I think Mark Morrison Reed, who you cited earlier, his point is very valid, that, are we really willing to recognize what it means to say we don't believe in hell? We don't believe that there is punishment, divine punishment. Which is, a pretty radical statement.
Huge, yes.
I don't believe in a Judeo-Christian God. I don't believe in heaven. So I'm not really certain. I'm a pretty dyed-in-the-wool humanist in a lot of ways, though I do have my sort of mystical tendencies. But, I certainly don't believe in hell, and I certainly believe that whatever we want to call sort of the universe, love is a powerful force within it. And that's pretty different than a lot of, even, say, a lot of my Episcopalian friends who, are very social gospel-y, but at the end of the day, do think that there is kind of sin and punishment and penance that is part of the cosmic order of the universe.
Mm-hmm. And I think that there's hopefully going to be more and more engagement for us as Unitarian Universalists, reckoning with hell, both as this thing that happens after death and the reality of hells on earth. I think one of my hopes is that we also engage with some queer theology in terms of that conversation, because I think sometimes when we say things in Unitarian Universalism that, well, God as a parent would be so loving and no parent would send their child to hell, and I was like, oh, maybe you don't know a whole lot about parenting of queer kids, where we see so many queer kids get thrown out on the street, trans kids being attacked by their parents, that there's nothing, unfortunately, inherently loving about the designation of parents. And so I think that'll be a neat thing for us to engage with theologically, is problematizing the idea of the family as an inherently loving system.
Yeah, I think both from queer theology and also from a lot of feminist and womanist perspectives, there's a similar move of questioning the idea of a loving parent, patriarchal deity as a model that we should lift up. And it is interesting. I've been going back and reading a lot of Channing recently, and William Ellery Channing, and he really likes God, the divine parent, as a metaphor. He just loves it.
So many of our religious ancestors do.
But I think that for him, because he is sort of the principal theologian of Unitarian Universalism within the sort of institutional traditions that we move, the fact that that's rooted in his theology, that is his favorite metaphor for God, is suggests that there's some deconstructing and some real questioning that needs to happen, which is, in some sense, a lot of what this action of immediate witness is also about. It's saying, okay, here's these systems that surround us that are human creations. They're not working. Or if they're working, well, okay, actually, I would argue that they're doing exactly what they're supposed to do.
Yes,
right. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to do.
Yep.
They are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. But we don't want them to be doing that. We want different work to be getting done in society, right? And so, we should deconstruct them and figure out what it is the work that we want society to do, and structure things differently. Because the thing that I think is so important to remember with things like police abolitionism and prison abolitionism, which you've touched on several times during this conversation, is that these are humanly constructed systems. They don't exist. They're not divinely given. Mm-hmm. They're things that people sat down and over time, created. And so we can create other things.
Yes.
It's just, it is both as complicated and as simple as that.
Absolutely. And And again, it's an invitation, right? That's the whole point, is that there are people already engaged in this work. People have been engaged in this work, right? As long as prisons have existed, there's been an abolitionist movement. As long as police have existed, there's been an abolitionist movement. That people have always been resisting, and it's an invitation for those who are new to this resistance to come, learn, engage, be part of it, and also to say, okay, well, where are we seeing these alternatives? How do they function? What do they do to keep us safe? And how are we looking at the underlying realities of what causes harm, right? If I don't want my house broken into, what are the things beyond punishing people who do it that's actually going to keep me safe? Because also so much of the police work happens after the harm has already occurred.
Well, I think that we are out of time, so I would like to thank you very much, Jason, for being part of today's forum. I think it was a very interesting, powerful conversation. I'm very excited about the action of immediate witness that you all put together and how it will help us here in Houston in our own work around reimagining policing.
Thanks so much for having me, Colin.
Yeah, so thank you very much for being with us. For those of you who are listening and watching, if you found this video to be helpful, please consider joining us for our weekly worship service. It's posted online each Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Central Daylight Time. This week we're offering a special musical service for the 4th of July holiday titled Marching On, a Tribute to the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And thank you to our staff for making this video possible. It was produced by Christian Holmes. Alma Viscara assisted with the editing. We'll see you all online soon and in person as soon as possible for us to gather again. And please remember that no matter how isolated you feel, we're all in this together.